Okay, folks, good morning. We're in week 5. Today we cover chapter 6, which is over procurement. And one of our classes that we make available to you is Logistics 228, which is Principles of Procurement. So you'll get a more in-depth knowledge about how that works, that important part of logistics and supply chain when you take that 200 level class. But this is sort of an introductory discussion about it, and it's basically purchasing as a synonym for it, where we are out buying either the things that component parts, raw materials, or anything that we don't produce ourselves. It could be transportation. We're procuring a way to deliver our product. So anything that we buy outside of the organization falls under this procurement. And these managers in procurement get a lot of responsibility. A lot of times they'll have a secondary role as to assisting in production and cycle times and things that have to do with the actual industry manufacturing part of it. If I can get that one to advance for me. So there's more, it talks about there's more emphasis put on this part of the supply chain than anywhere else, because it's where you spend money and it's where you can reduce your expenditures and your savings can come into play. And so they try to make sure that they get the best bang for their buck when it's getting resources they need to operate. And it immediately affects the bottom line. So if you're spending too much on fuel or you're spending too much on truck parts for your fleet, then you're going to make less when it comes to the bottom line. When small business is involved in procurement, it's usually you're regionally located, and you want to buy things regionally. And so if I'm in Indianapolis, I want to buy my fuel and my repair parts and raw materials and stuff close enough to where I don't have to incur this higher delivery charge or fuel surcharge to have that stuff brought to me. And so depending on where you're doing business, you want to try to procure locally. There's a lot of talk that's going on with the current administration about putting a tax on anything that comes into the country and having no tax on anything that goes out of the country. And so some big players like Walmart, who get 90% of their inventory from China, are highly against any changes in how things are right now, which there's no taxation or import fees that are put on their inventory. That would have a direct change in how they procure their inventory if they had to pay 30% more to buy an item from China than if they bought it in the U.S. And so they'd have to go back to how the roots of their Walmart was everything was made in the U.S. It was sold in a Walmart. They'd have to go back to that. And to save that 30% taxation, it could be as high as 30% for importing items outside of the U.S. So there's a lot of things in the works here that could change how currently we're operating in procurement, where we just go where the best deal is as far as expense, to let's go where we avoid this taxation. And we may pay a little bit more for it, but we won't have to pay taxes on it. And so bottom line is it's a better deal.
How is it cheaper for Walmart to get their stuff from China and not within the U.S.?
The labor. It's cheaper for everybody to get things from China because they undervalue their currency and they underpay their labor. And it's not, okay, we can't compete with them. So if it takes 3 hours to put together a TV and the components to make that TV are all manufactured, and it takes, another 10 hours for that, just the labor alone makes that TV cost twice as much as if it was made in the U.S. And And so with all the advances we have in shipping, we can send cargo ships that have millions of square feet of cargo on them that it would be pennies on the dollar to ship that over from China. And, so, and when, especially when you buy in large quantities and you get a discount for a larger lot, then if I bought one, if I buy 1,000,000, of course I'm going to get a discount. It could be as much as 50%. So that's why larger industries do business with China, India,
Hey, like
and Malaysia.
in my mind, Mr. Yancey, like right now, although this can change, I tell myself that's what I ultimately want to do. I ultimately want to move cargo internationally because for some reason I think that'll be like more lucrative in terms of me owning my own business, not working for a corporation.
Yeah, you could be like an agent that is like a third party that helps set up all of the necessary documents and the exporting, importing, customs. Yeah, that's a value-added position that is quite lucrative right now. So we're in procurement. They're talking about advances using technology, and one of them is this electronic procurement. In other words, it's sort of like having a credit card, a Visa or a MasterCard that you buy all of your supplies and stuff with. And the other one is talking about reverse auctions. And this is something that Walmart is quite versed at. They will say, hey, Vlasic Pickles, we want you to sell us your jars. They used to be a quart, now they're less than that. Your jar of pickles for 89 cents because we want to sell it for 99 cents. And right now Vlasic's charging $1.39 for it, and they go, well, how can we afford to do that? That's what it costs us more than 89 cents to make it. And so when you're dealing with Walmart and you're selling them train loads of product instead of truckloads or cases, you have to expand your operation to be able to keep up with the demand that Walmart will be asking from you. And when you do these larger lots, or if you're producing more jars of pickles, you can say, because you only pay one payment for your overhead on your warehouse or wherever you're producing this in a factory, and all the machinery that's involved in it, the only extra that you're going to pay for is either overtime or the extra cucumbers and vinegar and the ingredients that goes into it in the jar. So Vlasic was able to get that down to 89 cents to produce it, or 85 cents. So they made 4 cents a jar, and they still were making a lot more money doing business with Walmart than they were selling them on their own at $1.39. So this reverse auction thing, I tell people I want to pay $1.75 for gas. And maybe nobody says, well, you're crazy, we'll never sell you gas for that. But at some point, there's a gluttony of gas somewhere stored, and it only has a certain shelf life, maybe 7 or 8 months. And to keep this gas from going stale, they say, okay, we'll sell you 1,000 or 100,000 gallons of the gas at $1.70. So reverse auctions, you set your price, and suppliers come to you to meet that price.
But do you have to be a big business though?
No. I mean, you can go out right now, say if you wanted to buy your textbooks at $25 a textbook, you go out to different places in eBay and on Amazon, and you say, purchase now at $25. And somebody will say, you know, just to make sure I get rid of this book, I'll let it go for 25 bucks. That's the same concept. That reverse auction is you set the price, not the seller. The buyer sets the price. And so it's pretty common in different industries, but it's a major procurement instrument that's used to control cost and to have some type of a normacy when it comes to what your output is. So we go a little bit deeper in these electronic procurement cards, where you're going to have just authorized people to available. I've worked for Ivy Tech for 13 years. I don't have a card, but somebody that would be involved in replenishing office supplies or running a fleet for gas and things of that nature, those people all have cards. And so it's based on what your function is in an organization as to whether you would actually need one. And then it makes it kind of good for the organization, because now instead of having like purchase orders and you got to go to one person and get permission to buy toilet paper or a pencil or something, you can buy those yourself, and then all of the receipt with all of the things that you bought, the list of product that you bought, gets sent to that purchasing officer to list all of the expenditures that they had for that month. So anybody can go out and buy that's on this authorized list, and it still is one bill that's paid by the person that takes care of all of the procurement. And they can balance their inventories, and they can find out where, if I bought pencils for IB Tech in Lawrence at 3 cents a piece, and downtown they found them and they were 12 cents a piece, this procurement specialist could say, hey, we'd rather you buy your stuff at Lawrence because it's a lot less expensive. Or they'll go ahead and order pencils for everybody from Lawrence because they found such a good deal. So there's some other benefits as to having this system where they can find savings and cut costs. And one of the things that it says here is that limits spending during procurement cycle. So let's say that there's certain times, there's peak points where you have a lot of demand for capital, where you got to buy a lot of raw materials or a lot of parts. And then there's lower peak times where you have more cash available. When we talked about the accounting, 2 different accounting reports, that one was the cash flow, and it told how much money was available at any given time. This software with procurement cards keys in on that, and it knows what the balance is instantly. And so if I was to order toilet paper and we're at a point where our resources are at the lowest, it probably say denied until 15 days from now or 5 days from now or whatever, and let us reorder whenever we were going through a new cycle.
So is the procurement card like, is it corporate credit?
Yeah, it's basically that.
Okay.
And some of them can be just for fuel. Some of them can be just for office supplies. Some of them could be just for catering. I mean, just at Ivy Tech, I'm thinking of the different types of procurement cards we have that fall under that. They can only use it to buy certain products. And so, and it's based on what the function of their section is. So if I'm in charge of the shuttle vans and the SUVs that the college has, I shouldn't need anything but stuff to service those vehicles and to fuel them. I shouldn't need to buy party supplies or food for catering. That's not part of my function. And so it reduces the people who would that aren't authorized to make those purchases. So this is some of the benefits is it reduces the number of invoices. You just get one, and then they make one payment no matter how many holders there are out there. And it lets us make, even if I'm saying Shelbyville, and Shelbyville needs paint for something, to paint a door or something, if I'm the manager of that site, I can go get the paint. I don't have to ask somebody in Indianapolis or wherever to say, hey, can I go buy paint? It lets you make a quick fix or decision and handle it locally. And the suppliers like it because they're getting paid instantly right then. It's not like send in an invoice, give me a bill, and then 30, 60, 90 days later you get your money. They get it at the time that they give up the service or the goods. Just like if you were buying something at a checkout, they're getting their money right then. So there are some good parts that have to do with it. On the challenge side, if you're doing this in a global environment, there's differences in currency. And if I bought something, say, on Tuesday at 5 o'clock from Canada, and it was the Canadian dollar was 125 against the U.S. dollar, and they didn't process it until the next day. I thought I only spent $100 in U.S., but the next day, because there's a fluctuation in the currency, I may have to pay another $25 because it went up a nickel or something in its value. So when you got these currency differences and you can't lock it in for the time of purchase, it's at the time of exchange, then there's some differences in what you spend. And
Because
yeah,
Mr. Yancey, like at work, there's like a group of guys who trade currency on the I guess it's called Forex market, and they be making good money off of that. And I don't have time to get into it and learn it because I got, I'm taking 3 classes. I got enough to read and learn. But yeah, they make good money off of trading currency.
yeah, it's kind of tricky because it's fickle. Like if somebody says our interest rates may go up, then our value of our dollar, it actually goes up because more people want to have money in our market because it's going to have a higher return. If we say that we're not going to raise our interest rates, then it kind of makes our dollar flat or less attractive for other nations. But almost every country in the world has money in our market because we're the most stable market on the planet is the U.S. stock exchange and our treasury bills and our bonds. There's higher risk, like your friends are playing with. If I'm buying money in the Asian market and something happens over there, like Samsung's phone battery catches on fire, then their tech and their stock market goes in the toilet quick, and with that, their currency value. So you're really playing, you got to be almost a full-time involved type person to play currencies because it's very fickle. It'll change on any kind of a political or any kind of a development or recalls or anything.
And I think they use that to their advantage. You know how things could change quickly. They say you got to learn the patterns, but it has a protection called like stop pay where you only could lose so much. You could you could make a ceiling to where I'm not going to lose no more than $50 today.
Yes. You can electronically, if we're going to get a little bit in that, you can electronically, when you buy, you tell it, don't buy any stock until it's under $50. And then you set it to sell when it gets above 60. So you can walk away from it and know that you only got that much risk associated with it. There's other people who actually buy it saying, I want to buy 10 shares and say they were $10 a piece, so they got $100 in. And at the end of the day, those 10 shares are worth $15. And so it's $150 is what the value of those 10 shares are. So they borrowed, they didn't put any money up, $100, and they made $50 without any real risk because they borrowed against 10 shares. So what they got to get back is $100 instead of the 10 shares. So there's people that can manipulate the market based on whatever they're trading or whatever industry they follow, and it is very lucrative. There's folks that make 7, 8-digit incomes that are in that, but it also has a high risk involved in it. And so far, we're in the 2,600 or 20,600 level. Market share or number of shares out there. That's record high. But at some point, you keep thinking the pie keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. At some point, it's going to pop. But it depends on what your risk ability is. If you're a youngster like you, you could take a hit and still come back. Somebody that I invest a little differently where I don't have that much risk because I can't come back. I don't have 15 or 20 more working years to try to replace that loss. But there's some people that are out there betting the farm, the house, their parents' house, everything, and it's some risky stuff. But looking at the currency differences, and there's a lot of countries that don't even have access to the internet, yet alone our procurement software to be able to process a credit card. So we have to go in there with cash, or we have to go in there with something that we can trade to do business with them in procurement. And the card acceptance, if you go into a place, a store, they may not take Diners Club or American Express because they have a high per transaction rate associated with them. They prefer to have Visa or MasterCard. The same thing if you go overseas or in some parts of the country, they don't want to use your card because them accepting your card, they're going to have to pay a 1 or 2 or maybe even as much as 3% of what they sell to you, or they're going to have to pay that card company for the transaction fee. And so there's a lot of folks that's a loss that they don't want to absorb. They want you to absorb it if you're going to use that card. And of course, cultural issues. Some folks don't really trust credit. They want cash up front, and they may just want to barter. They may want to trade whatever you're making for what they're making. That may be how their culture works. So you got some pushback a little bit on the procurement side of it, on the using electronic stuff. So this is basically telling about you want to try to manage your base, and you want to develop good relationships. We talked about that when it comes to supply chain. That's all it is really, is relationships with everybody that touches a product or a service. And then supporting the operational requirements. These are the things that a procurement officer or a procurement specialist focuses on. And here's where you really have to know your stuff, or you really have to do your homework, is selecting what supplier or how many suppliers. So in the case that you were talking about earlier about your transformers not being available for your production, your procurement person should have had multi-suppliers for that, more than just one. And if they were just focused on one, then that got you folks in a situation where you had to shut down your operation. The loss of income potential and maybe the loss of trust in the folks that you're supplying your finished products to is a very high price to pay because you didn't select appropriate suppliers or enough suppliers. And so you have to be able to...
They said we're 35. They said we're 35 units behind at the warehouse that we didn't receive from them. So they said March, prepare to work the whole week, the whole month, every 7 days a week for the whole month of March.
Wow. Yeah, so that it kind of, you see that one ripple effect. It messes with the operations, who sets up your labor schedules, and then there's more expense involved in overtimes, and all of that kind of ripple effect from not having a strong evaluation and selection of your suppliers. And there's different ways that they come up with for that. This kind of, you're going to hear how you solve a problem, and it's going to start off with identify the problem and then come up with alternatives to answering the problem or fixing the problem, and then selecting the best alternative for the problem, and then implementing that alternative, and then being able to come back later and say, did that fix it, the problem, evaluating it. So it uses that same problem solving that's taught in management in procurement here. And the first one is identify need for supply. So you've identified at your organization, we need to find another supplier for these transformers. And then the next one was, we look at internal factors. In other words, are there policies that we can't buy it outside of the U.S.? Does it have to be within 50 miles? We don't want to pay warehouse fees, all this kind of stuff. And then external factors, if we buy from China, does that violate our warranty or our union or whatever? Then you identify potential ones by looking at where, at the information that you can get on these suppliers, and then you can establish what your criteria is. They need to be able to respond within 3 to 7 hours. They need to be able to handle a truckload increase in our demand. They have to be able to supply the transportation. You know, all of these things fall into the criteria that you're going to make for selection. And then you select them based on what your policies are and what their policies are. And it gives an example here about minority suppliers. There's majority suppliers are like the main manufacturers, and then you have these smaller businesses, medium-sized and small businesses that try to compete with them. A lot of times the large supplier can't make an adjustment as quickly as a smaller supplier can. So if all I make is transformers and I got my own shop and we can make 500 of those a day, and you say, hey, can you send me 500? That's the place to go. It may even be cheaper because I have lower overhead. I don't have a large floor plan I'm paying for. But there's always this risk of I'm so small I may not be able to keep up with all of your supply demand. So I'm just part of, you know, I'm a select group of suppliers. And then you evaluate your decision by finding out what their performance was. Did they get me those transformers? Are they working? Did we save money? Did they show up on time? You know, you're going to have like a scorecard that you keep on each of the suppliers. So this breaks it out the same way that we just did the chart. Let me close this door if somebody's making copies. And so one of the things I mentioned was either if it was going to be and when we look at select suppliers, if it's a single source, I'm just going to one place, or if it's going to be multiple sourcing. And what would be the advantages and disadvantages of those two? If I just got one person or one company that's giving me the part or the raw materials, or if I have several companies that I can go to that give me the part or the raw materials, what's the ups and downs of that?
Well, if you go one sourcing, then you're at the risk of being shut down because your supplier has an issue with their manufacturing line, or they can't get the material, or their lead times are way out there and they don't coincide with what you need. But with multiple sources, you can go to, when one person runs out, you can go to another supplier and get what you need and still keep running.
Okay, excellent. And that is the main reason to do that. But what about if you're trying to get a discount for high volume and you got it broke up into 10 smaller pieces, 10 suppliers are giving you a tenth of it, and you can't get to this bulk discount? Would that be reason to maybe looking at the best one and saying that we're going to go with a single source because they can give it to us at, you know, 70% of what these other folks are charging?
Right, because single sourcing, you could get a discount that way, but with multiple sourcing, they'd be in competition with each other and trying to win your business over the next customer or supplier. Absolutely.
And sometimes when you're doing multiple sourcing, it's not their primary function to make whatever your raw materials or your parts are. They probably do other things. And if you do a single source, for the most part, that is all they do is what you need. Whatever your raw materials are, that's what their primary job focus is. So you got quality issues that you might have to evaluate. Is a single source the best because that's all they do? Or are these multiple sources, are they competitive? Are they high quality because they want to take the business? So you have to be aware of the pros and cons in using both of those selections. I don't know why anybody would not look at multiple sourcing, unless it's you've got another part of your company, like a division that's outside of your physical building or your bottom line that you partnered with, or that it's the single source. It's, you know, it's like the boss's brother makes the raw materials that you need. There would be some other indicator maybe there that would make single source more desirable, but very, very few times would that be the smart way to go.
Well, couldn't they be a backup like with Carrier? They have a single source as the person who you primarily get it from, but then when they have disruptions in their organization, you can have a multiple sourcing that is your backup.
Yeah, and I imagine with technology and somewhere around 2 or 3 days ahead of time, you see that there's an issue coming, so you could give them reaction time instead of, uh-oh, we're out, I need it here in 2 hours. You could give them, you could see that there is a problem coming up whenever your inventory's down and you don't see the replenishment coming from your suppliers like it usually does. You could have time through automation to make those changes. But let's say you're playing second fiddle, you're the person that's the backup, and you only get business from Carrier once every year, then whatever Carrier wants, and you said that these transformers only you worked in your product. And so I've got warehouse space somewhere tied up with this backup of these transformers. I'm going to have to charge Carrier a little bit more because I've been holding them for a year in case they called. Whereas if I'm just making these transformers that are general use, they're seldom in the warehouse more than 30 days, and I can keep turning them over and not have this cost of storage. So, I mean, it plays at both ends, really.
And then they're going to pay more for, like you said, sometimes they might run out of a part and be like, they need it, I think they call it like a hot shot or whatever, they need it in a couple hours. And yeah, they pay a whole lot more to get them parts down real quick.
Yeah, because they're going to get a partial load and they're going to get it expedited, so they're going to pay more for that moving to the front of the line, more in fuel charges, more in labor, more in everything to get it put on location when it wasn't scheduled to be there. So, I mean, stuff happens. It's just what's your backup plan can mitigate the costs that you're going to incur in those kind of situations. And then the last item here, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in my last place of employment, we made batteries for sea containers that you put a bunch of batteries in, and then you connect it into the power grid, and it helps with the fluctuations in electricity and that kind of stuff. But our one source was from China, even though we had the patent on the chemical powder that went inside the battery or cells. They had to go to China to be put together, and they were the only supplier we had of that component, which was our main component. And so whenever they didn't meet schedules or things got held up in customs or for whatever reason, then we were on a shutdown because we didn't have the materials to build our parts. So that's one downfall of having a one-source supplier.
Yeah, and especially if that one source is overseas, with all types of different governmental constraints and transportation issues and all that, it really does, it's a high risk kind of a situation when you put them all in that kind of a equation. So
yeah, I never made one suppliers.
And you really want to try to develop relationships with local or regional suppliers just so they can be quicker in response and less on transportation and holding costs. The savings there, if it costs me $1 more for each one of those units of issue, what I save in out of stock and what I save in carrying charges and transportation is probably going to make that a wash. But just the security of knowing I've got a backup that's in Columbus, Indiana, and I'm operating in Indianapolis. I know that in hours these folks could respond to me. Whereas if I got to call somebody in China and say, where's our shipment, I'm not going to get that same kind of response. I'm not going to get the bulk in the large discount of that bulk, but I got to stay in business with the next unit of issue that I'm looking for. So yeah, it is. This is one of those kind of jobs that you develop these relationships and you kind of know who you can trust, and you know what kind of problems could arise, and you kind of have got a feel. You can see it in your inventory, and you can see it in the cost and the delivery times that are, if they're getting worse, where you know that you need to find another supplier. And whenever you change suppliers, you could be putting a whole factory out of business. I know one of my clients that I came in for was they made castings for transmissions for Toyota, and their castings were leaking. They wouldn't seal, so it was like the outer housing for the transmission. And once they put all the internal components in it and put it under pressure, it'd leak. And so here's a completed transmission that has to go back through disassembly and get recycled that costs them $700 or $800 a hit, and they still need another transmission to complete the car. So when I came in to help them on their quality, they had no way of checking that transmission casing before it left their facility. They didn't put them together. They just made the casing. And so if you got a supplier who is just, their whole focus is, yeah, we can make that casting for you, but we don't have any kind of a test bench to make sure that all the casting has been ground down and all the seals would fit in like it's supposed to. If you don't have that kind of quality check, then even though I'm getting it done locally, because you know Toyota's built local and they were ordering those parts local, they could still get a higher quality part from Canada or from China than what they were getting from Shelbyville. And so once they evaluated, here's the problem, we're about to lose this contract, which will cost 800 jobs and our reputation. We won't be making transmissions for housings for anybody else. They got serious about it. And one of the things they did was have my company come in and evaluate process improvements. And it was fixed by one of the hourly employees. He brought an aquarium in with a pump and submerged the transmission housing. It was like a 50-gallon, 40-gallon aquarium. He put the transmission housing in it with all the seals and everything connected in it and pressurized it, and they could tell where the leak was coming from. And so they went back in the line and found that there was residue in the press that wasn't cleaned out properly, that wasn't making a clean copy of the seal imprint, and they were able to fix that based on just a quality check. So you have to do this evaluation of is it performance or is it process based? And they were about to lose that contract because their performance, they were getting too many rejects. The quality had dropped. And if we were doing just straight process, saying, yeah, 700 transmission cases come out of there that week, that wouldn't answer the question. How many of them worked? 5. So then, you know, we can't stay in business with that low of a quality mark. So,
but you would think if they supplying parts for a big company such as Toyota, they would have their quality control in place. I mean, that's kind of weird to me.
They had a line that made transmissions for, I believe it was Honda, the housings for it. And they got a great reputation for that. But Honda came in with their own equipment and put it at the end of the line to check it. Toyota didn't do that. And so they were looking at what Honda had, and they couldn't copy their process because it was trademarked by Honda. So they had to come up with their own process.
Oh, you can't benchmark. You can't benchmark that.
You can, and that's what they had to do, but they didn't have a way to check to see where the zero deficiency or the oh crap deficiency was. Their main contracts are castings. It's a Ryobi is for like lawn equipment, small engines, and things of that nature, which they have a long tradition of manufacturing quality products. When they tried to branch out to bring on more employees and to keep all of their machines moving, that's when they got in trouble. So I think they were trying to grow too fast, too soon, and they really didn't have all of the groundwork in place in that situation. It wasn't that they were people that weren't good. It was just too much, too quick. and they weren't
So how did that
small things.
how did that end up working out? Did it end up working out good? They fixed
Yeah,
everything.
they
You
actually,
prosperous?
there was some other issues, like they had attendance issues because the Toyota wanted these transmission casings at their assembly plant at like 6 a.m. on Monday. And so that meant that they needed to work through the weekend to finish the weekly requirements. And they had high attendance absences over the weekends. And so another thing that we looked at was making the weekend 3 days. They got paid 3 12-hour shifts, got paid 40 hours. And we had a lot of folks that signed up for it. And we only let so many people that had good attendance records already apply for that. And so folks were working 3 days a week, getting paid for 40 hours. And then they had the rest of the week off. And pretty soon it became a thing where more people were trying to get on that weekend shift than were working Monday through Thursday. So it was operational. You had to look at the operations part of it. You had to look at for the procurement part, it was making sure that that press that they had bought with the molds and everything were still a high quality before they, continue production through it. So looking at after you've made this decision on whether you're going to select this supplier, we've done an audit basically that's told what their service was to us, did they respond quickly, what their production process was, did they have some type of quality control at the end, and then we look at performance-based. It's focused on their actual performance on a variety of criteria, including the cost and quality. So they got that, Ryobi got that transmission casing contract because they were the low bidder. But that shouldn't be the only criteria that you take into account whenever I'm Toyota. I should be looking at, okay, what else have they done that they've done well? Well, they've done the Honda transmissions well. They've done all these casings for small engines, for weed eaters and lawnmowers, snow blowers. They've done that for decades. So they did their due diligence, but did they say make one and let's see how it works? Let's see how you can do it. There's some major costs in setting up the tooling and all that kind of stuff. So you don't always get to do that dry run to see if the performance is where you want it to be. But you can write it into a contract that says if it drops below this high quality, then the money that you're getting paid is going to drop below this, the equal the quality level. And so that would motivate them to take the right steps in the right time to get the part out to them operational. So this is looking at your awareness of the demand that you need for certain types of raw materials or component parts, or even supplies that you're getting. And within that, you got to prioritize which one's the most important at the current time. I mean, you can actually not buy supplies for internal operations like oils and filters and inkjet or copy machine paper, and you can cripple your organization by not taking care of those things too. So you have to have a priority way that you're going to procure. And this portfolio approach basically gives them an idea that we need this much in raw materials, say those aluminum ingots that they buy to make the castings at Ryobi. And then we need this many component parts to ship out. Say they want to put the seals in themselves in Shelbyville to make sure that they all fit right. Then now we have to have those component parts brought in to put on that transmission bell housing. And then they want to make sure they keep these presses clean. So there's wire brushes and grinders and all these different kinds of stones and stuff that they use to clean all these press components out to make the molds. So if they didn't do all three of those things, they'd still have a quality issue and they'd lose the contract. Now, I don't know why I think Kojak when I see this, but Kryjac or Aljack's portfolio, it's used to classify their purchases in terms of their importance and complexity. So that's basically if it's going to take a long time to get it, or if it's a high cost, high demand, then it gets a different priority. And so if it's a low priority kind of thing that we can get locally and it can be fixed relatively simple, then it's got a lower priority number. And they kind of give us a little grid here that shows if it's non-critical, it's low supply complex or risk, I can get it anywhere. And it's not very financially important to the performance of the organization. All the way over to high complexity. It takes a lot of steps to get this particular part or this raw material. And it's not very expensive, but because of this it's so complex to get it, it causes a bottleneck. And this bottleneck is basically, it's determining how many units that you can produce based on that one process. And everything else could be running at 100%, but when it gets to a machine that only can, there's one behind it that can do 100 an hour, and the machine that it goes to can only do 20 an hour. 20 an hour is your output, and so there's a bottleneck there. So the fix would be put 5 machines that do 20 an hour on the other side of the one that does 100, and then you still maintain that 100 pieces an hour being completed. So that's where you employ strategic. If it's a high complex process to get that procurement, and that it's a high financial importance. If it's a high dollar and there's an investment in it, then you have to start planning this out and be more strategic about making that the highest priority. So reverse market, we talked about that, Walmart being a very motivated in making sure that they're aggressive in the way they procure items. They actually have you physically come to them in Arkansas and sit in their little cubicle, knee to knee with their purchaser, eyeball to eyeball. It's sort of an intimidation thing. You're out there waiting. I've got folks that have done procurement with Walmart, and they said it's almost like you're going to see the principal or something. You know, you're waiting out in the area for them. You drove through. There's no major way to get to where they're at. You're driving down a dusty road for a while. And they have you wait for them, and then you're having these conversations. The conversation starts off with the buyer, the purchaser, saying, we want your product, but we want it at this price, and we want this many available to us on a daily, hourly, weekly basis. And so when the purchaser establishes the prices, the terms, the conditions, and all these other behaviors, it's basically up to me. If I'm a supplier, do I really want to do business with them? And the store shelves that are out there that belong to Walmart make that so attractive that it's a motivation for me to try to do business with them. And that's what it's talking about here. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that did Walmart start that kind of that type of business relationships with companies?
I'm sure that it goes way back. I mean, the Egyptians.
90s?
No, I'd say it'd probably go back to 2000 BC. There was something like that. But when it comes to larger, I mean, Walmart is a monster. There's 3 corporations that have been in the top of the stock exchange since they've kept record. There's 3. It's Walmart, Exxon, Mobil, and GM. That was the 3. Now GM won't ever be there again because it's GMX. It's filed bankruptcy, so it gets an X after its call letters, and that kind of keeps them from ever being identified as one of the top stocks in the market. But Walmart, since it came out and it went into a nationwide distribution, it's been 1, 2, or 3 on the stock market all the time. So it's got that kind of muscle. And if you look at the other ones, oil, Exxon, Mobil, they don't really need a whole lot of suppliers other than pipe. And then you got GM, which needs a lot of suppliers to put these cars together, the complexity, probably the most complex out of those three, is Walmart, because there's so many items in their inventory that they have to be aggressive and have this reverse marketing type of step.
Yeah, Amazon, they're like ridiculously aggressive. The guy who I'm about to start training with and work for his trucking company and move freight with him, he said he went to Ohio to do it was like a conference event that Amazon put on, and basically with a bunch of trucking companies, and they basically was letting them know this is what we're going to pay you to move our freight. And he told me basically pretty much everybody walked out of there because what Amazon was offering, he said, is what he would pay his owner-operator drivers to do it. So he said it was like no money in there for him. And I was like, well, you got to realize their logistics is probably 75% of their business, so they're trying to save the most money they can in moving this freight. But at the same time, didn't nobody want to move their freight?
Well, and I think that if you had trucks that were already on the road, and that if any hour that they set idling where they're not moving freight is an hour that you have a loss in income potential. And so just like a backhaul, if you know anything about how these transports work, at one end you're picking up a truckload or a partial truckload, and you're going to deliver it at the other end. Well, the trip back is zero profit. You're paying for labor, wear and tear on your truck, and you've got a lost opportunity that truck could have been filled with some type of freight coming back in the other direction. Well, third-party providers have made inroads because they can go out and link up those empty trucks and empty train cars and empty planes and empty boats. They can link those up with people who want to use at a reduced cost that transportation to get their resources back to where those trucks wanted to return to. So if I got a manufacturer in Indianapolis and I'm delivering to Nashville, Tennessee, I probably got something in Nashville, Tennessee that needs to come to Indianapolis. And so it's trying to get that linked up to come back. And your example you had with them talking to those truck companies, it might have been feasible to take that reduced amount offered in reverse marketing or reverse purchasing to ensure that you always had a load that came back. So you could still charge the certain rate going one way, but there's potential to make money because now you're not losing when it comes back. And so that could be what Amazon was looking for, is where's your region of business that you operate in? Well, if you're going from Indianapolis to Nashville, we will give you Nashville to Indianapolis runs day and night anytime you want them, but we only pay this rate. And whatever that rate is better than zero when you're coming back empty.
And that's what I said to him. I said, because he said everybody, all the trucking companies left except for one dude, one trucking company. He was like, why, how are they going to make any money or do any business with Amazon at these rates? And then I said to him, well, maybe they want to get in solid because that's a solid company, and later on they'll be able to negotiate better rates.
Yeah, and if inflation kicks in where fuel prices go up, Amazon's going to charge more, so they'll pay more. But Amazon started free delivery, and they got Prime that offers free delivery. And that makes them competitive over eBay and over any of these other e-procurement, anythings, because it's coming to your door for free. And the way they cover that cost is they undersell the supplier. So if I've got, say, ink pens I want to sell at 10 cents a piece, and I sell 1,000 of them, I'm only going to get 8 cents because I have to go in with the folks and help pay for the transportation of it, or the postage and the mailing and all that. So it's kind of a it's looking out for the customer. It's making sure that the customer gets the best deal, because consumers in the U.S. go for the best deal. They don't look deep enough to see if it's quality, if it's scratch and dent. They want the best deal. And there's some savvy shoppers that, do look at the high quality end of it, and they don't mind paying for handling and shipping and all that. But for the most part, if I go out myself and I see the same thing, I'm trying to think of the last thing I ordered, filters for my furnace. If I go out and I find filters for my furnace, 2 for $50 free delivery, or 2 for $46 with $12 delivery, I go for the 2 for $50 with free delivery. And that's just how people shop. They look at which one's the better value or better cost, least cost. So this is talking about how, as in this reverse procurement environment, that there's going to be inefficiencies for us to try to make a deal with like Amazon or with Walmart, because we already have a process set up, and now they want us to change the way we do business to accommodate them. And it's usually we're going to have to do business leaner, spending less money so that we can sell it at a lower cost to get a higher volume. So you have to really look at, those guys that left the room looked at it and said, well, we just don't have that much that we can trim, or I don't know enough about how to manipulate spending and purchasing to be able to do business with them. And so
I just remember they wanted you to carry a certain insurance. Like they wasn't willing to. They wanted you to carry a certain insurance, and that insurance basically costed $20,000 a year. That's what it was. And I remember.
And they wouldn't give them any kind of they wouldn't buy into half of it or anything like that, because
I don't know the details. I just know that's what he told me. He said my partner. He told me that when he talked to whoever he needed to talk to, they told him, yeah, it's a certain insurance that you got to carry, and over the year it'll be about $20,000. And he said that and he said they was already underbid, and then he got to carry this 20 days. Said it wasn't worth it from any aspect.
Well, insurance is one of those things that it's covering your worst case scenario, that truck got robbed or crushed or burned up or whatever, and whatever's inside of it was high value, that they had to have $20,000 for a premium. That was probably a $100 million bond. If the premiums are $20,000, it's covering more than $20,000.
Well, yeah, but he felt like that was a insurance that Amazon should be carrying. He said he just felt like they trying to really undercut. Now, like I told him, man, that's logistics is about 80% of their business. That's all they do is deliver stuff. So that's probably how they making so much money and worth so much, because they cut so much on the logistics end.
Yeah, they've made it into a science. I mean, we've got case study after case study in our books about FedEx and UPS. And if it was me, they don't really have to have that high of a FedEx and UPS. They're self-insured because their value is way more than whatever they would be calling. But let's say you are a private truck company, and this truckload of iPhones is worth $5 million, and your whole truck company is worth the cost of the rig. It's worth $80,000. Well, you're out $80,000 if you crush that load. They're out the $5 million that they invested in getting that load to where it's supposed to go. They have to pay for the loss of whatever they were transporting. So they wanted to share in the responsibility to make sure they got quality drivers and committed companies that would be at their level of service that they provide. And it's tough to do that. They were actually looking for a third-party provider that would operate at their same level of quality. And FedEx has a much larger umbrella to spread those costs over. If you're a single truck driver, you don't have anywhere to spread those costs. So you really are bidded out of the market like your friend was saying. So we got, when we get into the global, where we're trying to get stuff at a reasonable discount from China, it's inputs from anywhere in the world. So it not only is in China, it could be, you know, in England, it could be in Scotland. There's a lot of places that corporations have moved to because they offer zero corporate tax, and they offer a workforce that's motivated, that'll work for, you know, a lower wage, and they are offered benefits like free land if they build the plant there. And so there's a lot of things that have pulled U.S. companies out there into these different countries to do a global type of a business. If I'm doing business across the planet, does it really matter which country I've got my stuff in? I just go for the best deal for where I'm going to do operations at. So it's talking about, it's driven by the input strategy. They're looking for low cost of land, taxes, labor, and they're looking for high quality output. So this workforce and the raw materials that they're procuring in that country, they have to be high quality so that they can maintain their business. And then the market access strategy is where the organization sourcing and markets where it plans to do its business. So that begs the question of why aren't we building iPhones in the U.S., because they're the major customer of Apple. And I think that there's going to be some situations in the near future where they will be built in the U.S. because it'll be cheaper than paying this penalty to bring each one of those phones in from China. But it's also going to improve our labor market here, where more people can work, and it'll be brand loyal to things that are made in America. People will buy that first if it's high quality, because it's employing their relatives or themselves. I mean, there's some things that can change that would make it more attractive to be a global industry and make and produce everything in the U.S. As it stands right now, other countries, their currencies devalued and their labor market is devalued. Even the raw materials are devalued. So it's on purpose. A country is saying, come over here because we have to employ, you know, 1 billion people. And unemployment is something that we struggle against every day to keep people from starving. So come to our country and we'll do all of these things to make sure that you are successful. It's tough to compete against that. And so unless things change drastically to where it makes that unattractive, those foreign global markets are still going to draw a lot of manufacturing, a lot of procurement's going to come from them. So this is basically looking at how we develop the model. You're planning on where you're going to do the business, what your specifications are to either manufacture something, and then how you're going to evaluate the quality of it. And if you're doing business in a different environment, then your management has to be involved in the cultural differences and doing business in that particular region. And then there's going to be the question of how do I get that finished product from China or from Scotland or wherever, and what are my transportation and holding costs going to be? It's going to add to the cost of making that phone or what have you. And then coming up with a timeline to implement it would allow them to construct the facilities and set up these transportation routes and these warehouses and everything that you're going to need to move your product to the customer. And then looking for improvements to make sure that there's no slowdowns because of strikes, or there's no slowdowns because of governmental changes in policy or border disputes or acts of war or terrorism. I mean, there's a lot of things that can come into play here that could mess up your plan. And this kind of just talks about some of the hidden costs that are in this global procurement. duty and tariff charges that occur, and like I was explaining earlier, this current administration is talking about a 25–30% tax on anything that comes into the country. So that's going to be a major thing that all global markets are going to have to adjust to if that becomes a reality. Increased inventory related costs associated with global supply chains. So if I got to wait for a ship to come in every 3 weeks, I got to keep 3 weeks worth of inventory, and that it calls for either keeping it at the dock or transporting it in small pieces or bringing this large shipment in. Now I have to offer a warehouse to store all this excess inventory. And there's a lot of risk in that because it could be inventory that gets damaged. It could be inventory that gets pilfered, stolen. It could be inventory that becomes obsolete. There's a lot of risk involved in it when I have to carry this extra inventory. And then they talk about rising levels of logistics costs with ocean freight rates, depending on where it's coming from. And if you got to go around another country that's unsafe waters, to either because of weather or piracy or what have you, all of those go into the cost of using ocean freight. And so now we get into the green part of this, where we're trying to procure things that don't impact the environment. We want to use as little waste as possible. We want to make a smallest carbon footprint as possible. And if you're making something in another country and then you're bringing it here several thousand miles, that made a carbon footprint when it was produced, and now it's making another carbon footprint when it's coming to you. So, I mean, looking at globally how you do business, if they did business in the U.S., there would be this higher level of laws and regulations for clean air, clean water, and not polluting the earth. If you're doing business in a foreign country that doesn't have these developed policies and laws and taxes, then there's less of an emphasis on being responsible. And so some people escape all of these regulations by doing business in countries that don't have those same high standards. But if you're going to bring it back, if you're going to bring it back to the U.S., you have to have went through those same high standards. Say again?
So I was going to say, so if you're getting some stuff from China, raw material, would it be their responsibility to make it sustainable? Because it's coming from their country.
No, that's really not a priority for them. Their highest priority is employment. So if they have a larger carbon output, I mean, they're building a coal-fired plant every day in China. That's not really a priority to them. Their number one priority is making money for their people so that they can develop a middle class, and they can have folks move out of poverty, and they can have less people starving to death. That's what their motivation is. And our motivation, they're in a different stage in how we do business, is doing as little harm as possible to the environment. So we got two different outcomes that we're shooting for. Right. But looking, this is talking about our social responsibility is the diversity, the environment, human rights, philanthropy, and safety. This isn't other countries' 5 dimensions of social responsibility. They don't have social responsibility. They have other priorities that circumvent these. And
I always understand to say that, like for when my job went to China, the plants they built was more like the benefit for the employees versus getting paid, because they would pay for their transportation to get there. They would feed them throughout the day, forever, however long they were there, but not necessarily compensate them with money. So I don't know how true that is, but that was the process that they used when our group went there.
If you're in a communist country, the country dictates, your labor. I mean, if I say I don't want to work for anything less than $20 an hour and I'm in China, they say bullshit. You're going to work for $2 a day and like it, because you're going to be feeding your family and you'll have a place to stay. If you don't work for $2 a day, you don't have food, you don't have a place to stay. So it is sort of like you're talking about. It's there's child labor laws that aren't covered there. There's underage employees, whole families that are indentured basically to do these type of low-skilled jobs at zero basic cost for labor. But this is talking about the ethical concerned areas here: gift giving, bribes, misuse of information, improper knowledge acquisition. In other words, they violate our trademark and our agreements. They just copy something or reverse engineer it. Lying or misrepresenting the truth. No, there was no lead-based paint in those teething rings we sold to you for your children. That happened. Product quality or lack of. There is no real quality control when you order 1 million copies of something and there's 5,000 of those are bad. They just say, well, that was 0.05, that's fine. But when 5,000 people get a bum master cylinder and their brakes don't work, or their car door comes open, it does matter. Every one of those have got to be tested in 100% quality. Misuse of company assets. Yeah, there's a lot of senior executives in China that come to the U.S. and blow a lot of money on partying. And then conflicts of interest. We've been hearing about that with the current administration's business holdings and how their influence in their current position could be good for business. And so these are issues that when we look at the ethical side of being responsible procurement folks, that we have to investigate. And here, when we've got to try to recover something that did not get used in our procurement, we classify them as either scrap, surplus, obsolete, or waste. And so this comes back to the procurement manager saying, all right, we got this many, something simple as pallets. We have this many pallets that we don't need now, that they either got busted up or whatever. So we need to sell them for scrap, or we need to replace them with heavier duty ones or plastic ones or metal ones. They're obsolete, or they're just scrap wood and we need to get them hauled off the premises. And so that would fall to the procurement manager as well, as to get rid of this inventory that no longer is part of the operation. And a lot of times if you get a dime to a dollar, then you get a ticker tape parade. Wow, you saved us 90 cents. We would have lost all of that if you hadn't, or you saved us 10 cents. We would have lost it all if you hadn't figured out a way to scrap it or to sell it to somebody else because it's obsolete, or to send it back if it's surplus. But when it's waste material, it usually incurs a cost to the organization because there's nobody buying it. You got to pay to have it removed. And lastly, we're talking about we're going to simultaneously increase revenues, but while looking at these environmental considerations. And there's things that you can do that are smart, like alternative energy, coming up with more shorter routes, or instead of making 10 deliveries, make 2 larger deliveries. All of these different things are good for the bottom dollar, and they're good for the environment. So when you're thinking long term, if you're going to be successful in the industry, the regulations are heavily laid on reducing the carbon footprint that your organization leaves. And so you have to get serious about how you can reduce that. And this kind of goes over the same things that we just discussed about those 4 areas. So we had a lot of information about procurement today. And as I said, you're going to see this class in detail where you get to do case studies, and you're going to get to have a swing maybe at some of the different software that's out there for procurement that's being used in the industry. So you'll get more in-depth information about it, because it is a large chunk of the industry is in either procurement, inventory. You know, it's a major function of supply chain, and so there's a lot of of career opportunities in this area that you might want to explore. So I'm going to stop our recording.